So thank you so much for attending this PDC Places panel that will be focused on questions around the digitalization of public services. And we have a great great panelists with us. Sophia, if we can go to the next slide, that will be answering the question of, well, where does PD sit and what does PD contribute within the context of the increased digitalization of public services and interactions with governments. We have Rehema with us, Luisa, Cristiano, Nicola, Joanna, and Praveen. So very diverse group coming at this question from different places. Before we begin, I would first like to acknowledge the traditional custodians and territories. I am currently based in Newcastle in the northeast of the UK, where I'm still entangled and working through the colonial legacies and debris that exists within and in relation to where I am from, which is Lebanon. And there I would like to acknowledge the families of Al-Awar and Talhouk that have nourished me and sustained me, as well as the villages and mountains of Lebanon that have provided shelter for us. Before we begin, throughout this session and all the PDC sessions, we really encourage everyone to be mindful of people's differences and be patient with some of the technical constraints and hiccups. We really promote listening deeply to one another and respecting one another. Please mute your microphone during the sessions. Of course, unless in the discussion and question time you raise your hand, please do feel free to unmute then. Be careful in your choice of words, and let's try to have conversations that are inclusive. Let's not trivialize each other and phrase critiques respectfully, and avoid generalizations, right? Especially for these PDC Places panels, we are all coming at the challenges that we face and the questions from different perspectives. We will be recording this session. If you want to be anonymous, you can change your name on Zoom, and you can also turn your camera off. And please, we invite everyone in the chat to acknowledge the traditional custodians and lands from where we are attending. So, to kick off in response to the question of what does PD have to contribute in context of increased digitalization of public services and government interactions, we're going to start with Rehema, who's joining us from Makerere University in Uganda. Rehema, go ahead.
Microphone. Thank you, Reem. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Hope you can see me and hear me well. Reem, you can see me and hear me well? Perfect. My name is Rehema, based in Makerere University, Uganda, where I'm a faculty in the Department of Information Systems. My research interests are digital inclusion, human-centered design, coupled with usability, accessibility, and particularly in the areas of e-government and e-learning. And lately, I have also started exploring AI for good. So the question, contributing to the first question, what does PDC have to contribute to digitalization? Allow me start with our experiences with digitalization in Africa, but mainly drawing on the experience of Uganda. So our digitalization process has been slow. It's really slow, mainly driven by the techies with not much interest and involvement of top management and general users. And this meant little financial support. Of course, when you have little executive support, you have little financial support. Then also challenged by poor ICT infrastructure, ranging from availability of end user devices, poor connectivity, high costs of connectivity, limited expertise. Initially also the techies were limited, the number of techies was limited. Then we also had a limited expertise among end users. Digital literacy was very low. Then outsourcing for big systems, they were enterprise systems, they were mainly outsourced. And this meant little say of the institutions and the people going to use these systems, especially coming from being digitally literate, little interest from the executive, limited technical expertise, etc. And this led to many failed projects where a lot of money had been sunk, a lot of money, thousands and millions of dollars sunk into these projects, and a number of them donor funded, some of them on loans. So a number of them failed. But amid these failures, we had a few successes. And what led to these successes was mainly top executive support. With top executive support meant good funding, sometimes from internal sources, and then also user-driven, institutional, business unit-driven, as opposed to being tech-driven. So we've had a couple of successes, and these currently are working as case studies for the other institutions. Examples of these include our tax collection agency, Uganda Revenue Authority. We have the judiciary. We have the Social Security Fund. We have Business Registration Services Bureau. So we have these examples amid us which have succeeded almost, for most of them, almost 70 to 80% of their operations. Engagement with the citizens are computerized. So you can file returns, tax returns with our tax collection agency. You can apply for a number of things where we have to pay money online and receive the services without stepping in their offices. So there's been some little progress in these institutions. These are serving as case studies for the other institutions to benchmark from. Then came COVID. COVID changed things around. How did it change things around? Suddenly everyone had to be home. You couldn't move. And institutions realized the only way we can continue operations is to digitize. So this brought many people on board for digitalization, more top management support, more user interest and involvement. The initiatives were now more user-driven, more top-down as opposed to bottom-up. Money for ICT infrastructure was found. So this accelerated the process of digitization. And thankfully, because people have realized the importance of digitization, the momentum has stayed on. However, we still have a couple of challenges with ICT infrastructure. We are still not yet there. We still have some people, especially out of town, they struggle with end user devices. They struggle with internet connectivity, especially. They struggle with digital literacy, but at least now we have more user involvement, we have more executive support, we have more user-driven initiatives for digitization, unlike before. So how does this compare with the private sector? Private sector is ahead because for them, they've not had as many challenges as the government sector has had. So for them, they are much ahead, even in terms of datafication. Is it datafication or datafication? They are ahead already. They have roles for data officers, data assistants, etc. Data-related roles in their institutions. They have institutional structures. They have guidelines in place for collecting and utilization of data, both internally and externally. They make efforts to reach out to external data sources. So they are already ahead. Haven't I used up my 8 minutes, Reem?
I think you can start wrapping up and then we can take questions.
I could start wrapping up. Well, I've said much of what I wanted to say, but all in all is COVID was a blessing in disguise in terms of digitization for our part of the world, because all those institutions that still felt we can do without digitization, or it's not as important as the other aspects of our operations, they were awakened. They saw how important digitization was in order to keep their operations running. And they also realized how useful digitization is, how it improves efficiency, effectiveness, cuts costs, is very convenient. As we speak now, a number of institutions allow people still work from home, much as now the economy is fully open. People still work remotely. So this has helped the journey for digitization. It also helped institutions realize the importance of being the ones in the driving seat for digitalization efforts, instead of leaving digitalization efforts to the IT team. They are now driving, they are now the ones coming up and saying, we think this process or this function can work better if it is digitized. And then from there, IT takes up and works with them, and they remain in the driving seat, ensuring that the solutions meet their needs, instead of just waiting on IT and saying, here you are, this is what we need done, do it and bring it to us. They drive the process, they engage, and ensure that they actually get something that meets their needs, answers to their requirements, their context, which wasn't the case before for many institutions, not for all, but for many institutions in my country and surrounding countries, which I'm familiar with, like Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, and the other African countries. Thank you very much. Back to you, Reem.
Thank you, Rehema. Does anyone have any questions? And here I would like to also add panelists. You can ask each other questions as well. If you have a question, please put it in the chat or in the Q&A. It doesn't seem like we have a question now. So what we can do is move on to the next person and then have questions and discussion, more time for questions and discussions at the end. Thank you very much, Rehema. All right. Next, we have Luisa from Germany. Luisa, if
yeah,
you can...
thank you, Reem. I actually tried to share my screen, but try. Okay. Yeah, so yeah, hi everyone. I'm actually based at the Leuphana University in Lüneburg. So I was the co-organizer of the PDC Places Germany. And what I wanted to talk about today is actually my PhD research, which is yeah, highly connected to the topics we discussed in Germany. So my research focuses on participatory design in urban planning, and in kind of investigating hybrid tools and applications that support citizen feedback, and highlights the extent to which the tools can actually try to remove barriers concerning participatory activities, I call them. And I'm trying to contribute to kind of both technology mediated citizen participation and effective methods of participatory urban planning. and trying to explore case studies linked to mobility strategies, because especially in talking about mobility strategies, people who are actively involved are not always actively involved in the processes of designing. So I look at the relationship between the design of the tools and the practice of the participatory process. So in kind of looking at the potentials, but also challenges of hybrid participation tools, my ambition is to kind of address the topic that is somehow as relevant as in today's digital society. So we actually, I think we cannot plan without digitalization. So because we are using social media, we are using all the tools. I have developed a research questions, which is actually related to hybrid participation processes. And I will investigate that in a European context, looking at different cities and actually trying to compare their approach. And what I found out, and that's actually something we also discussed at our sessions during the PDC Places activities, is that we actually need kind of these in situ activities as well. So we have this huge like digital aspect, and as Rehema said, it's probably coming back to us again in the next months, because we're working remotely. We need kind of digital devices, but what we also need is these activities. And when I first started attending the PDC conferences, it was actually in Belgium 2018, I was also really fascinated about the PD community. So what I think is useful in that sense is that we actually further contribute in actually teaching PD. So what Rana yesterday said in the big panel, or the paper panel, was that we actually also need to develop the teaching and the talking about PD. So here you can see a project which is called Füreinander Chance. So it's in one area in Hamburg where they actually try to create an open workshop where citizens come together and actually discuss and try to engage in situ. And the second aspect I wanted to talk about is actually a face-to-face consultation. So one of our guest lecturers talked about the citizen project Lüneburg 2030 Plus, and some of you heard about it already, but I actually found very interesting that they have open consultation hours where you can try to go there as a citizen and talk to them. And it's not only about the digital realm, but also about kind of the analog realm. And to sum it up, I actually think that we need this interdisciplinary approach, which I also try to work with when teaching the course at the Leuphana University about participatory design in cities, because I actually think that it needs more than designers. And I think we also in the past years, we always talked about designers as kind of communicators. And I think that's the also most important thing about digital devices, because it's always about communication, and that's why it's so interesting, but also dangerous maybe. And then the low threshold accessibility, because most of the times I think the digital realm can be very intimidating. So I think we also need to work on these kind of topics in the next years to also make that more accessible and more open-minded also. And then the hybrid digital and analog tools in PD, in my opinion, lead to this exchange moment where we can actually try to connect the one realm where we have in situ activities, and then the other realm where we have maybe also more methodologies we can tackle and develop together. All right, that's from me. Very short, but let's.
Thank you
let's
very
discuss.
much, Luisa. Does anyone have any questions or comments? What we're finding in these panels that people tend to put them in the chat after time allocated, and we end up discussing them all together. So with that in mind, we can move to the next person if no one has any questions, and we'll be discussing it all together. Cristiano?
Good morning, guys. My name is Cristiano. I'm working in the University of Limerick. I'm a lecturer in interaction design, and I've been a long-standing member of the participatory design community. I am not an expert in public sector, and I believe my presence here is mostly linked to the organization of the PDC Place Island than any other prestigious publication in digitalization of public services, which I don't have much experience. But if I have to address the question, I might draw on some a few things that might have happened while I have spent my time in Ireland. Clearly a different environment than Uganda, for instance, I would say. As a Mediterranean, I'm from Italy originally. I found Ireland to be quite efficient when it comes to public services, with the exception of the healthcare sector, but that's my own assessment. But in terms of the back and forth, nicely mediated by a website with the public administration is quite rewarding, and considering coming from a place where things tends to get much more complicated and takes much more time and become much more convoluted and but having said that, I do believe that in order to give room to PD or create areas for PD to actually contribute to what seems to be an overall digitalization of the civic services all over the world, is obviously a change of perhaps a culture on the administrative and the bureaucrats. The resistance that I would see here is that while we're all praising participation and inclusion, at the practical level, people is not equipped culturally as well as methodologically speaking to actually implement that. A small example that I can bring up, Limerick now has an initiative of becoming an autistic friendly city. And in UL, few years back, I was responsible together with another lecturer in speech and language therapy to create a sort of a special interest group in autism, around autism. In a matter of a couple of years, either because the topic is topical on the one hand, and because of some initiative that acquired a little bit of visibility, this special interest group grew and is growing significantly. And we started to get some visibility. So at some stage, we were approached by the people responsible of implementing this Limerick autistic friendly city. Clearly there were some funds available. The city council and the county council collaborated almost for the first time historically in this initiative. and we were consulted, or maybe we just wave our hands. I don't remember the initiative exactly how the first contact happened, but at some stage we were somehow involved. And our contribution was to actually convene, as I said, the group in the University of Limerick. This special interest group was a very heterogeneous group. A lot of people came together around this issue or topic of autism because they were different, not because we were alike or we were on the same wavelength. People with different expertise. We have biology, we have more molecular biologists as well as occupational therapists in the group, family members, parents, but also lecturers who are in the spectrum, and you wouldn't tell that they are. But anyway, all these differences for the municipality represented a sort of a richness in terms of how many recommendation we could have been able to provide them. And this is what we did. We actually convened, we circulated documentation, and each one of us expert, somehow we were jotting down recommendation on what it means for us and what it should mean to be an autistic friendly city. There is where we actually started to find a little bit of resistance, which we attribute to being not prepared to manage participation, being not prepared to be open, accepting openness and inclusion as a value, but then not being equipped to actually run it and do it. So we ended up having this sort of a dumb dialogue with no really back and forth, with us sending a series of recommendations and not knowing where these, how these were uptaken or where these are ended up, maybe in a drawer. And so what we learned there is that despite there is often a lot of intentions, good intentions, when it comes to public money, and those who are managing the public money, I guess they on the one hand they are much more accountable, publicly accountable on how that money are spent, and so there are a lot of logics that the participants might not know or fully appreciate. On the other hand, there is a lack of equipment in doing these consultations, in fearing to expose yourself too much. When you actually do consultation and you do them genuinely, you actually somehow agree to lose control on the situation. And obviously an administrator who has a budget probably is, unless he or she is culturally tuned into it, or perhaps even trained on the benefit, we will find resistance. And so again, it feels on the exposed theory, as they say, we're all on board when it comes to participation in digitalization of services or public services in general. But then when it comes into implementation, I found that there are cultural barriers, especially in the public sector. I could relate to the comment before when I don't remember the name. Well, in the first presentation, when comparison with the private sector was made, and I do believe that's a matter of accountability. Private sector, they need to be less accountable on how to spend their money. They can be much more experimental and perhaps, invest something on a participatory initiative. If it fails, nobody will know. In the public sector, it is a bit more complicated, I guess, because you are in public, and so you have to be much more accountable. And I believe that is something that might break, as in slow down the uptake of participatory approaches there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cristiano.
Oh, I don't have an echo. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I was confused by the comment. Thank you very much. And yeah.
Does anyone have any questions for Cristiano or comments? If not, we're gonna circle back to the discussion with everyone. Right, up next we have Reem from NID in India.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I will share my screen. So thanks for this opportunity to host one of the PDC places and also inviting us for this panel discussion today. Just to give you the context, NID is the oldest design school in India, and we are part of the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, and we do a lot of projects with the government. Government is our big client through our design practice office, where our faculties are involved. And we have done a lot of nation building projects. Personally speaking, I'm an industrial designer, not into digital design space much, but last 25 years, I've been a design faculty and practitioner of participatory design through my teaching, research, and practice, especially projects in public domain. So today I'm also representing PDC Places India as a director of the institute, and I also gathered some of the national initiatives in digital space, as well as one of the examples where one of our graduates have worked through a participatory process in the so if you know, in India, there are a lot of citizen-centric services in digital space have come up in many last 2-3 decades. And Digital India is the flagship program of the government with the vision of transforming India into the digital world. It has a lot of pillars looking at broadband highways to kind of mobile connectivity, public internet access program, reforming a lot of government processes, electronics delivery of services, information to all, and early harvest programs, we call it. Each of these are very complex, and it has cut across multiple ministries and the departments. Some of the key digital platforms for the utility, healthcare, travel, education, finance, agriculture, procurement, welfare, engagement have been very core of these initiatives. The low-cost deployment of these programs with the interportable design and large-scale adoption has been the key in many of such programs. For example, the Aadhaar, which is the digital identity program, which is a low-cost deployment program. CoWIN, which is the largest vaccination platform, is the longest and largest vaccination program. Is a simple and interportable design. Whereas digital locker in my government is the largest scale adoption to reach, and largest scale adoption reach actually designed around that kind of a thing. And just to look at the scale, there's a 1.3 billion identities are generated using Aadhaar. 200 million transactions they do through the UPI systems. There are 2,100 million vaccine doses administered by the CoWIN setting, and about 3 to 4 billion learning lessons are delivered through Diksha. So I wanted to just quickly, 2-3 minutes, I will run through this case of Diksha, which is an education portal for digital infrastructure for knowledge sharing. This portal has really built up in the last few years, but especially during the COVID times. And this is developed purely on the open architecture, open access, open licensing, diversity and choice and autonomy. It leverages highly scalable and flexible digital infrastructure while keeping the teachers and learnings at the learners at the center. It started by Ministry of Education. It is also built around the teacher's life cycle. It supports 18 plus languages in the curricula. And it is leveraged and developed for the school education, foundation learning programs, and support inclusive learning also for the differently abled. Looking at PD in the context of Diksha, this platform, the trained designers are enabled and facilitate users at the scale. In this case, teachers as content creators who have very limited exposure to digital content platforms. This model of co-creation participatory is based on building robust design systems which are situated within digital content creation platforms to enable teachers and content creators to create content that is useful, consistent, discoverable on the digital platform. And selected teachers were also provided the training. So in this case, participatory design is not only viewed as a flat team which is doing this, but the multidisciplinary collaborating team which behaves more like a relay race besides the team sport. And fostering this culture of participatory design collaboration, which requires a lot of collaborations with the leadership, with the ministries and NGOs, apart from other stakeholders, to enable it to the scale. Actually, scale is the very important part of this. So digital is the equally but about technology and to ensure adoption. And at the Diksha, it was observed that tools created keeping existing skill sets for teachers, especially pedagogy, teaching materials, structure, curriculum, and molding technology to serve these capabilities ensured less friction onboarding and with adoption. And iterative process with open and inclusive feedback loops, like systems thinking between technology creators and content creators, content consumers, facilitating officials, larger community where existing artifacts had to be redesigned to accommodate digital interventions, ensured success with adoption and reduction friction. Example is getting various state governments to modify textbooks, printing to include QR codes that the teacher could see to access digital content in its context. Over 100,000 unique QR codes mapped over 280,000 multiple unique digital content were created and consumed, involving 1.47 billion minutes of time spent on digital content. So to conclude, I would say that successful participatory design for the large scale government programs, digital programs require visionary leadership, active official engagement, participant involvement, feedback and empowerment, design systems set up within the digital platforms to structure and streamline on the cornerstone of human-centered design approaches. And Diksha platform saw a huge uptick during online learning of the students affected by the COVID-19 platform, COVID-19 pandemic, and few underlying technology blocks were quickly adopted to scale to create, distribute billions of COVID vaccination certificates digitally. So again, the systems approach, when coupled with participatory design, can really bring in modularity as well as adaptability to wider context and typical of government programs. So thank you for your time. This is from my side.
Thank you so much, Praveen. Super interesting. Does anyone have any questions for Praveen? All right, then let's, I don't see any in the chat or the Q&A. So let's then go to, I think we have up next, Joanna.
Hello, everybody. I'm Joanna Saad-Solonen and coming from the IT University of Copenhagen in Denmark. And I'm also one of the co-organizers of the Nordic PDC Places and one of our topics in that PDC place, which, by the way, if you're interested, it will happen later in September. So it's not happening in parallel with PDC right now, but in September. And one of the topics is indeed participation in public service digitalization. So I come with a Nordic perspective also myself. I have lived and worked for the last 20 years in Finland and later also in Denmark, where I'm now located. And I mean, I have to say that these two countries really score very high in terms of digitization in general, also digitization of public services. Now, for example, this year, Finland ranked first in the European Commission's annual Digital Economy and Society Index, the DESI, and Denmark is coming next after. And this index is made up of 4 areas, including connectivity, human capital, which also includes digital skills, integration of digital technologies, and digital public services. And the perfect DESI score is 100. The EU average is 52.3. So Finland reached a score of 69.9 and Denmark 69.3. So, I mean, the Nordics are regarded also, you know, when you think about it, it's like, it's kind of, you know, this digitalized, very digitalized part of the world. But what does it mean in terms of participation in digitization of public services in particular? It's not that everything goes well. It's not that everything is rosy, that we have all the answers. And indeed, that digitization is happening in a participatory or even respectful way. I mean, that's not necessarily the case. So I'll try to share my screen now just to show you, let me see, just to show you a project I am involved in together with Nicola, who is also in this panel. So it's a project funded by a Nordic fund called Nordforsk. It's called CAPE, Civic Agency in Public E-Service Innovation. And we have partners from 3 Nordic countries, Denmark, Finland, and Sweden. Universities, but also we collaborate with public libraries. So at the start, when we were kind of thinking of this project, it was obvious for us that we thought that there's a potential for co-design and participatory design in the context of digitization of public services. I mean, for many of us, it made us think of the early days of PD, right? When IT was imposed by management in the workplace. And now we're in a situation where public services are being digitalized. You can say by force, I mean, there is a push towards that. Being forced, this digitization is being forced on citizens who don't have much to say about it. So that's why we thought that it might be interesting to look at potential for opening up participation in that context. And then we looked in particular, or we are still looking, so the project is ongoing, right? And we don't have answers yet, but look at the potential that public libraries might have in this process of opening up public digitization to processes of participation. And why public libraries? Because they are these institutions of welfare state here in the Nordics. They are spaces that are open to everyone. At the same time, also public libraries are rethinking their role. And they are also spaces where people come with problems related to the use of digital tools and also digital services. So even though we were kind of inspired by, ideas of living labs to create spaces where service providers, service developers, citizens can come together, it was for us obvious to not try to think of new spaces, but rather use existing ones, like the public libraries that exist in the three Nordic countries of that project. So I'll stop sharing and just say a few words before I end. So keeping in mind this our interest in the potential of participatory design, co-design, it's still when we went to the local libraries, and here I will take the example of Denmark, leading a lot on the work of Camilla Vesterberg Christensen, who is our PhD scholar working in this project. And looking at what's happening in the libraries, first trying to understand what's happening, we noticed that there is, for example, a group of active seniors who are helping, acting as volunteers to help other seniors with issues related to the use of digital technologies and digital services. So we started thinking that that's maybe a more interesting entry point into these challenges of this kind of pushed digitalization of the public services, and look at what these volunteers are actually doing in the space of the library. And here it was interesting to see how in a country that is very much pushing digitization, there is still a lot of people that have to rely on the help of others to be able to navigate and get to the services that they as citizens are entitled to have access to and to use. And one of the concepts we've been looking into and thinking about is this idea of this ambiguous quasi-public service in what is, for example, happening in the libraries with the volunteers that don't have any particular training. They do it because they're seniors who want to keep productive, and they like to meet each other and to meet other people, and they're there to help others, and often they don't have even the answers, but just the fact that they are there and offering a helping hand to others is often seen as enough by the people who come with anxiety and stress, how to use these services, but then they see that there's someone listening to that. Having said that, we also have to acknowledge that, for example, in Denmark, there is more and more interest in the public sector towards engaging, inviting citizens, especially using design terminology or collaborative design technology terminology. So, for example, there is the formation of user panels to test new features. For example, there is the formation of a network, and for example, I'm thinking of the inclusion network in Denmark, where members of the digital agency are in connection with different groups of activists or association all over Denmark that want to bring forward the concerns of citizens. But at the same time, I don't know what to say in terms of the potential of participatory design in this context that is continuously changing and forming one another with different actors, stakeholders. We're not too sure where it's going, and we are also not sure as participatory designers or what is our role here. And I think in this example of trying to understand what volunteers are doing, I think it's also very interesting and important for us to learn how these processes of helping with IT, right, are taking place on the ground. And I think I leave it to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanna. I'm conscious of the time, so we'll come to any questions at the end. I'm just going to quickly move to Nicola.
Yes, thank you, Reem. Nicola Morelli, come from Aalborg University in Copenhagen, and as Joanna mentioned, I collaborated in the project she just explained, CAPE, and we are having a number of other collaborations also in the Nordic PDC. So my perspective, I mean, I work in service design at Aalborg University, and my perspective, therefore, is from service design. And I would like to highlight my own way of getting to the project that Joanna has already just explained. My entrance point to the question of digitalization was a project some years ago called Open for Citizens, in which we started from the assumption, when we were focusing on open data, we started from the assumption that a large and increasing number of open data sets are available, which express a potential, but this potential is largely ignored. Open data are produced by municipalities, infrastructure companies, transport companies, meteorological research institutions, and even by ourselves, by citizens. We all produce data, and in fact, we not always have full access, actually almost never have full access to our own data as well. The idea that we had with this project Open for Citizen was that open data is a common. Actually, it's not a new idea. It's not that we had this idea, because Elinor Ostrom was already mentioning the question of defining knowledge as a common, for instance, and many other scholars have worked on that. But we started from this idea of a common. I don't know if in other section of the conference the concept of common has been discussed, but just to recap, a common is a resource that is available for everybody. And this resource can be used by whoever wants to access to it and knows how to access. So the common is a very old concept that existed centuries ago. A lake is a common resource of water and food that the community living around it can use. But here is important to note that a common the concept of common doesn't only refer to the intrinsic characteristic of the resource, the water or the data in our case, but also on the specific management of this resource. So it refers to a particular resource, plus a community that use this resource, plus a set of rules that regulates the access and exploitation of the resource. And what happens in the case of open data? We have a resource, but the community of users is not yet defined. Of course, there are people that know how to use it, but many other people do not know how to use this resource. And also there is no specific sector practice around the data as resource, open data as a resource. So the role of our activity around data was to define modes of use for open data, taking into account the community, a community of citizens that could be able to use it. And we worked on different communities, migrants or people in a neighbor or elderly people and so on. In this project, we organized the definition of such mode of use through civic hackathons. What are civic hackathons? They are not the hackathons as we know mostly, so the 2 or 3 days in which a group of programmers are working intensively to produce solutions that very often do not have a problem to solve. We wanted the solution owners to work together with the problem owners. So we wanted to put together relevant actors around the problem and see how open data could actually be used to solve this problem. With this idea, I mean, we had a very long pre-hack session, 3 or 4 months, in which we made sure that relevant actors were actually participating to the hackathon together with the programmers. And we had these hackathons, and we also tried to develop some the ideas coming out from a hackathon, and some of them have been actually implemented. So the idea was not only, of course, to generate the solutions, but also to generate a new practice of collaboration and citizen participation, in which the hackathons represent one of the possible strategies to define a possible way of working, but also to increase the awareness of the resource, the data, open data, and also to create a new demand for open data, because we also discovered that the offer of open data, so the aggregation of data sets, is actually depending also on the demand. So if we shape the demand in a different way, we can shape also the offering in a different way. And another thing that we discover in our activity, and here we are getting closer to the CAPE project, is that the aggregation of relevant actors for the definition of new practice for the use of open data and the process of democratization of digital technology in general must be supported by some form of civic agency, and the definition of public physical space like the library. And here we are at the CAPE. It is our personal path to the CAPE project. Libraries can be the places where people meet, exchange knowledge, and disseminate solutions. It's very similar part of what happened to the Fab Labs, because in the Fab Lab now I can go to generate my own product. But I can also go there because I need assistance, because I can exchange experience with other people, because I can socialize my knowledge. So in the Open for Citizen problem, we call this Open Data Lab. And then we had the opportunity to develop this concept, to work on a development of this concept in the CAPE project, where we formed these civic information centers that are part of the lab, of the libraries. Just you know, to conclude my short contribution, the digitalization, in my case the question of data, but in general digitalization, is a pervasive phenomenon, and it is very abstract in se, but it needs some especially for some communities, for some disadvantaged category of citizens, it needs a concrete place, a physical place to refer to. And this is also referring to what Luisa was saying before. I mean, they created a place to meet as well. And many other projects are based on a place to meet. And so although digitalization is something that is quite abstract, the involvement of people into the process of digitalization necessarily is based on a physical contiguity and on places to meet. And with this, I conclude my, I don't know how many minutes.
Thank you very much, Nicola. We are coming to the end of the time, so I want to ask the panelists if you're available, we can, because we do have, there's a break after this, so we can spend more time answering questions. We have a few questions in the chat, so if you're available to stay a bit more, that would be brilliant. Thank you. I can see people putting in the chat that they're available. Thank you. So I'm going to start with one of the questions that we got from Simran Chopra. Actually, there are two questions that I see linked from Simran. First, she asked Rehema about if government bodies are aligned to the outcomes of the participatory projects that we are working on, and also to reflect on the scales on which digitization functions and can limit or scaffold participation from citizens within the larger set of stakeholders. So how did the governments align with these principles of participation and the outcomes that we tend to work towards, and also if our outcomes are about increasing participation of citizens, well, how does the scale of the digitization functions limit or support participation as we see it within participation design? I'm sorry, Simran, if I misconstrued your question, but that's what I understood, and they're brilliant questions. Do any of our panelists have a response to that?
Perhaps I can just throw the first stone because what I just mentioned, the digitalization in some cases, I mean, there are two scales probably. One is the pervasive system, the pervasive digitalization that the most of the citizens can understand and handle to a certain level. When we talk about digitalization in those categories of citizens that do not have an easy access to it, digitalization cannot be pervasive as it is in other cases. That means we cannot count that sooner or later elderly people, for instance, will start using more and more elderly people will start using digitalization or the infrastructure of digitalization. I think that since there is quite a strong dependence on the physical meeting, so the physical contiguity, I can imagine that it's a sort of cluster development. So there are clusters around communities or around specific problems that can actually put together a number of people that are interested either in the community or in the problem, and therefore use the specific digital infrastructure that is available to solve that problem. Probably they will not have a sort of general knowledge about digitalization, but be specific on that specific infrastructure.
Yeah, I think the context of marginalization and becomes very important when we think about kind of citizen participation. And I wonder, Rehema, from your experience in Uganda, how can we work with PD to kind of align these issues and outcomes with government agendas and outcomes that they expect?
Thank you, Reem. I'm not a PD expert. I'm mainly knowledgeable in digital inclusion and human-centered design, but I believe they are related. So if I miss out something pertinent to PD, kindly forgive me. My take on this is the more we engage, the more we put out our work and make it available in spaces that people engaged in these digitization efforts in the government can see, and at every opportunity we share with them. Normally in my country, academia gets invited to stakeholder engagement events. So you share when sometimes this can happen earlier in the process, or some other times, which is more often, they invite you when they're almost done, when not much can be done. But other times you also get to be part of the teams, like I responded to some run. We become part of these teams that are developing these digital solutions. So that gives us a chance to influence the participatory practices within these projects, and that helps. But of course, the final decision lies with the owners of the projects. Sometimes you're overpowered or you're overruled, or there are many other. They bring up issues of time. We don't have so much time to engage. The funding is not enough. All those issues. But I believe if we continue using every opportunity to share what we know, both in written form, but also verbally whenever we engage with these different stakeholders, the more these practices will be appreciated and implemented in digitization efforts.
Thank you so much, Rehema. And you said, and all of you mentioned funding and time. And here I'd like to bring in Andy, because Andy put in a question about scale. That often dictate our funding and time available. Andy, do you want to go ahead and ask that question?
Well, it was just when Praveen was talking about the context of the Diksha project in India, and I found and I was in a session earlier, sort of talking about participation really at a very sort of micro level, in terms of the immediate interactions and touches within a workshop. And I just sort of started to think, well, you know, do we actually need to develop a language for talking about, for distinguishing these arenas? I mean, we've got this concept of arenas of participation, which has been useful to us for many years, but somehow when we use the term participatory design to refer to these radically different activities, I just wonder, you know, how do we develop our language and our thinking and the notions of, or you know, what our values are in these different scales? Because actually, you know, ultimately the decisions that we make if we're involved in something like the Diksha project and Aadhaar, you know, they are being imposed on some people who are not going to be happy.
Yeah.
So where, you know, where do we sit in that politics?
Praveen?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Do you have a response to that? And Cristiano, I also saw your hand up. I was also going to go to you next with this question, because a city is also a large scale, and so is our understandings of autism and the diversity in it. So let's start with Praveen and your thoughts coming from the perspective of having worked on these big projects.
Well, I have not worked on any of these projects, but I think what Andy has pointed out is very relevant. I think the I think the way this thing happens right now, possibly in this project, is there may be some kind of participation in a process when they start a project, but I think that it actually goes to a lot of feedback loops when things come up, and then it is a continuous process of improvement. So in a large scale projects, the idea of participatory thing will be a continuous process for different kinds of issues which will come across, and different kinds of feedback it will come across. But the issue here is also very different because of there's a huge diversity of the population, the multilingual, the literacy rates, there's a whole urban rural settings, and also there are other levels of complexity which is involving many of such. So I'm sure. I mean, there has to be kind of different narrative in the process when it comes to idea of participatory design in the large scale projects.
Thank you, Praveen. Cristiano?
Not an answer, perhaps a further articulation of the questions. For me, there is a confusion between output and outcome. We seems to be using them interchangeably. When we talk about outcomes, in my understanding as a PD designer from academia, well, we like to be surprised, right? And those paying for it, they don't like to be surprised. They like to be in control. So whether we are in the public or on the private sector, I think there is an expectation on the sponsor of what the output is. But that there is much more than just the output, the thing being designed. And now, so the question becomes, if I try to put that in a matrix, we have the large scale and the small scale. And then we have the large scale output and the large scale outcome. And there obviously a factor back to the issue of control, having control, accountability. Let's go back to the example of this small group from the university that is almost grassroots, from the bottom up, genuinely showing competencies. And yet, why is the municipality should follow our recommendations? They will have to.
I think we've lost Cristiano. Hopefully he'll pop back in. But I guess I have one question, and also panelists, if you want to kind of add on to what's being discussed, feel free to. But I guess my last tiny question, but also big one, is what are we willing then to negotiate from within the PD values when we encounter large scale design endeavors? And how do we, and if you've had any experiences where you've had to negotiate that because it's working on e-government and government services projects? Any thoughts? Joanna, Luisa?
I mean, I still think that, I mean, from experience, that we shouldn't also kind of belittle in the small, right? The experimental, more local, micro level of participations that we have the privilege and opportunities to work within the context of academia. And I think there are people interested in hearing about that, something that cannot be done in the big scale in organizations that have to take on the tough decisions. And I think at the same time, in terms of language and the nuances of what participation can mean, I think it is our role to bring these up, right? Because if I look, for example, in the Nordic countries, there is this interest, but oh yes, we're doing participation, we have user panels, and it ends up being this kind of consultation type of participation that is usually done in the public sector, whether it's in urban planning, now in digitalization context, etc. And then there's the belief that, this is extremely creative and participatory, etc. And it might be good and useful, but I think it's also our role to expand the understanding of what participation may mean and what it may entail.
Thank you so much, Joanna. See, Cristiano is back. Cristiano, do you want to end this session with what you were going to say?
No, again, I was going back to accountability. When you have large scale, you have to not only organize and manage bigger numbers, but also justify why you're giving voice to someone and not to someone else. And when the scale is large, it is becoming a more difficult task. And if I put my shoes on an administrator, a politician, or someone who pays for it, I understand the reluctance of opening up completely, because then you will have to, you're responsible at the end of the day for how those monies are spent. And so, and they end up doing these panel, for instance, or consultation, which in the end of the day are kind of a token. It's just there, a tick box exercise. We have done the consultation, but then at the end of the day, we already know how to spend the money, and we are not going to change that.
Thank you very much. And thank you all. Luisa, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just a short comment. I also thought about by scaling it up, is it rather like sharing information, or is it knowledge production? I think that's also something we should keep in mind if we can kind of challenge that in doing PD in a large scale. So that's actually another question also about the language we use, obviously. But,
thank you. I love this panel. We throw more questions than answer, but that's part of our process in PD, which is brilliant. Rehema, you have your hand up.
Just to add something small on negotiating values with the user community and sometimes the clients. What we try to do is to show them the gains and losses, what is in to gain and what is in to lose if they do not adopt these practices, rather than imposing on them, these terminologies of participatory design. So if you start from, you must follow participatory design, it's very important. You must simplify it to their level. People who have no idea about design, people who have no idea about your participation, you just bring it to the level of what will they gain by doing what you're advising them to do, and what will they lose if they do not do it. So from that perspective, it becomes much easier to get them to buy into the ideas than if you came purely from the academic point of view without coming from their level and simplifying it to a level of somebody who totally has no idea about this field, but rather is interested in, having something work, something, coming up with something effective, something that will do what they want it to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Rehema. And I think with that note, which is a very powerful one, we can end this session. Thank you everyone for participating in such a very dynamic and kind of dynamic and multi-perspective discussion. We have a break now, and then there are a couple of paper sessions, and let's not forget we have our keynote, another keynote today as part of the conference. Thank you all again so much for participating. All right, take care.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Reem.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye, thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye all. Thank you.
Bye.